Hey y'all, welcome and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Morgan, and here we do all things spooky, and I would absolutely love to have you if you love all things spooky. As long as I've been uploading on TikTok, every October has been, a new thing that I wanted to do, whether that is exploring cemeteries, counting down haunted places, counting down scary movies. We are doing something. But this year, I decided I have so many scary stories that are sent in to me. Why don't I tell one every day while cooking a dish that reminds me of Halloween or fall? So that is exactly what we've been doing over there, and we are now halfway through, so I thought I would post the first half on here in case you guys don't follow me on there or haven't been keeping up, and I will post the other half at the end of October. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoy the first half of this series. It was a ton of fun to make, and I cannot wait for you to see the other half.
My parents divorced 4 years ago. I found an old porcelain doll in one of the storage rooms that I vaguely remember being attracted to in a thrift store many years ago. She's a very pretty wedding doll in a white dress. I packed her up in my stuff, and she's been in my closet ever since. She creeped me out when I first found her, but I brought her anyways, which was a big mistake. The first few years that I lived here, I felt watched, like I wasn't safe in my room. Around a year ago, I received 5 dolls from a family friend. The 3 big ones, now named Elizabeth, Susie, and Sarah, all sit on top of my bookshelf overlooking my bedroom. I felt safer with them around. Well, recently, I had my psychic empath friend stay the night with me, and she picked up each of the dolls to see if they had any sort of attachments or anything. Elizabeth was extremely powerful. I was told very protective and sort of sisterly. The other 2 were weaker, but definitely did have attachments. Sarah has a rosary wrapped around her and her hands zip-tied. I got her that way. My friend advised me to keep her that way because she was very iffy on whether what was attached to her was kind or not. Once we were done with those 3, I grabbed the other 2 dolls previously mentioned. They don't have names, but they're twins, pink and blue, and the thrifted doll. There was nothing in the small dolls, but she grabbed the thrifted one and almost immediately gave her back to me. She said, "I don't like that at all." Even I could feel that something was wrong. The doll was very warm, and the room started heating up as well. She picked the doll up one more time, and it burned her. She said it felt like touching fire. We put the doll away, but didn't really do anything to keep her in there, just put up a few mental barriers. The room was sweltering hot at this point, and my friend had a fever. We ended up making a salt barrier after something scratched my friend's cheek, and we went on as normal. I think Elizabeth is keeping me protected here. The second story takes place at my dad's house, a trailer surrounded on 3 sides by 25 acres of woods. I've always felt watched at my dad's house, even when I was really little. I knew I was never truly alone in that house, and all the bedrooms gave me terrible vibes. I never really said anything because my mom insisted ghosts weren't real. Later on, I learned that one of the reasons I never felt alone was because there was a house ghost named Michael. Well, I think that was his name. My sister told me about him a while ago. She said he used to throw socks and move me around my crib when I slept. He's not really important to this story, but I felt like mentioning him was a good idea. I really don't know why. Well, yesterday I had my friend, the same friend from earlier, come hang out for a bit before she went to pick her brother up from school. She's been helping me work to communicate with the 3 girls at my mom's, and we started paying attention for reasons I'm still unsure of. She got a few lighthearted, funny things, but eventually something started asking for food. Eventually I could hear it too. We laughed about it and then went on with our lives. Well, that afternoon I was getting ready to go out to eat with my family when something started repeating, "Do you feel alive?" in my head. At that same time, I heard whispering behind me, but I turned around and nothing. This thing repeated that phrase until we left the house. When it again started asking for food. Dinner went by without issue, but on the way home, I started almost struggling to breathe. My chest felt heavy, and I swear I felt hands on my throat with thumbs pressing up against my jaw. I said some prayers and set a barrier, and it stopped. I grabbed a candle on my way home and lit it to attempt to communicate with whatever it was and make it leave me alone. It started off lighthearted and sort of funny, but eventually I learned it was a fae and it asked for my name. I gave a fake name and ended the communication, but this thing began to repeat soul in my head, and I saw something in the corner of my room that just wouldn't leave, and I knew it wanted to hurt me. After a night full of panic attacks, bad dreams, tarot readings, and cleansings, I don't know what to do. When I was around 13 years old, I lived with my grandparents in Georgia due to my parents' ongoing financial issues. The town that I was staying in just so happened to be the Savannah, Georgia. Considering you seem to be into all things spooky, I'll assume you'll understand the gravity that name carries. My grandparents were never the overly religious type. They went to church on Sundays and attended communion, but not much else. However, my grandparents were extremely superstitious. So much so that if we broke any of their superstitious rules, they'd book a motel for us and send us there for the night, us being me and my younger brother. I believe the superstition has to do with them growing up in the Appalachian part of Virginia, but you're free to draw your own conclusions. My grandmother was always the one to tell us stories about the creatures in the woods and things. However, her stories were not strict to just Appalachia. Every once in a while, she'd talk about the paranormal things over in Savannah, specifically the paranormal on the islands. Savannah has a very dense folklore when it comes to the paranormal, leading to several of these stories never being discovered and only being discussed through word. One story, however, became a strange reality for me. One night when my grandmother had sat down to enjoy dinner, I could tell that she was going to tell us another story that night. She always had a specific attitude about her when she did. The best that I can recount from this story that she told me was that the boghorn likes to mimic the sound of its victims, or soon-to-be victims, similar to a mimic or a walker. However, what makes this thing different is that it wanted you to know it wasn't human. It thrived off of fear. It starts in stages, odd scratches at your door, whimpers, growls. It all eventually ends up with the sound of your distorted and broken voice calling for you behind a door. This all happens over the course of several nights, but on the final night, it does not speak, whine, or growl. It laughs. Not a happy laugh or a maniac laugh, a mocking laugh, distorted and twisted. The story goes that most at this stage, if not already, open the door. It's believed that whatever is lurking behind that door possesses the body and forces it to end the lives of everyone in that home before then committing on itself. I still wonder to this day why she told me that story, considering I was 13. As far as I can tell, the story has no internet presence and is only known by the islanders. Now, you may be wondering what the name of this evil being is, and I wasn't really made aware of it either until about a decade later. I decided to start asking the locals by recalling the story. Most refused to say the name as they feared it was a bad omen, but eventually an older man confessed. The story originated from the late 1800s around the time of yellow fever. Apparently it was brushed off as an old wives' tale to make sense of the plague and how it spreads and killed so many households overnight. But I recently learned that this couldn't be farther from the truth. About a month ago, I was laying in bed with my boyfriend, arms wrapped around each other as we watched Netflix. I was staying in Savannah for the week, attending my grandmother's funeral. My boyfriend insisted on coming, and it was around 2 a.m. when we heard it. Ever so quietly, the sound of breathing could be heard. I stopped my partner from investigating immediately. Over the next 3 nights, the noises got louder, distorted, unorganized. While home alone a few nights later, I heard it, the laugh, and it was the worst thing I could have ever imagined. I felt it pulling me towards that door. I don't know how, but I fell asleep. I have no plans to visit the city ever again. I have never once spoke of this situation out loud to anyone, but I feel like it's about time to at least tell it once. I was with my now ex, we were freshly married, and I was around 4 months pregnant at the time. And, like every other young couple, we really wanted to buy a house, and so we did. The house was foreclosed on before we bought it. It was in extremely rough shape, so we did buy it. We moved in and started a huge renovation top to bottom. We renovated for around 5 months, and we were finally getting close to the finish line with the renovations, and I would constantly hear the new laminate floors creaking. Oh, they're just new and settling in, I would tell myself, and it never dawned on me that they weren't settling during the day. They were only settling in the dark of night. One night, it's around 9 p.m., and I'm laying in bed feeding my baby son a bottle, and suddenly I see feet when I look left down to the floor. Something's lying by my bed, on its back, and I peek over further and see nothing. I laid in bed for around 30 minutes, convincing myself that I was so tired from having a young baby and losing it from sleep deprivation since my son was so colicky. I was extremely scared and would have told myself anything to downplay that moment, and eventually I knew it wasn't still there and fell asleep hours later. The next night was a weekend, and I took my colicky son outside to put us both in the hot tub. It was out the back of the house where it was pitch black past the porch. I felt like we were being watched, and whatever this was wanted my son. That night I ended up so scared that we went to a hotel for the night. The next week, I saged the house, and it seemed to have worked, and then things really amped up. I would see something crawling on the floor, tall, skinny, and usually army crawling or crawling on all fours. Occasionally, I would see it moving around in a backbend around the house, and I saw this thing all the time and was terrified, but also never said anything because I felt crazy. The hot tub would stay set at 66 degrees, way too cold, and we never messed with it. My husband traveled for work and was rarely home, and we ended up moving out of that house. I wholeheartedly believed that that thing wanted my son. No problems after leaving. I'm unsure if you'll see this, or if you might know what this means or what I'm dealing with, but I'm coming up short so far in my research on what exactly I might be dealing with or what it could be. I have 3 cats, all of which have different meows, but I've had them for so long that I know what their meows sound like to a T. About 2 weeks ago, I started hearing meows in another room that didn't quite sound like my cat's. Not only did they just sound off from sounding like my cat, they sounded off from sounding like any cat ever. One of my cats has recently been to the vet, so I would go to check on them all while hearing this, not fully thinking anything of it, but they would either be asleep or cleaning themselves or eating and clearly not acting as if they had just meowed. A few days ago, after I first heard this, my husband said that he thought he heard a cat that didn't sound like our cat. He just ignored it. He was clearly the smarter one. Well, around a week or so ago, it started where the meows started to sound more and more like my pet's meows, but would be coming from another room where all of my cats would be in the same room or eyesight of me. Like, I am fully aware that it's none of my cats because I'm looking right at them, but I'm still hearing it. One of my cats has begun hissing when she hears the meowing and growling into the other room. Now it's beginning to get more persistent. When I'm home, I think I hear a meow that's not one of my cats, at least one every other night. My husband hears it at least once a week, and our roommate has said she hears a meow that sounds just like one of our cats when that cat is sitting on her bed, and it's happened at least twice. I'm not sure if this is a mimic, or if it could be something else. I don't know exactly what to do or what would be the best thing to get rid of this. I definitely do a lot of physical and metaphysical cleansing. I've used salt, sigils, incense, sound cleansing, and so far it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and I was wondering if you could give me any sort of advice. Thank you for any time that you take to read this and any advice that you give. A horrifying thing that I've found out over the years of having an attachment is that once you notice it, it never stops. The door swings open, you catch it, and then suddenly the knocks on the siding outside of your bedroom window become a lot more concerning. You hear a whisper, and suddenly there's warnings in the wind. I noticed that everything got pretty bad after I heard something in the woods and ran from it. I live in northern Minnesota, sometimes prowling these woods, and I swear to you I used to leave my window cracked at night until the day that I was out goofing around and heard something whisper my name to me. It wasn't the name my family uses, but the nickname I'm commonly called by my friends and coworkers. That told me enough that whatever it is has some kind of fascination with me, enough to follow me to my place of work. And now I can't be outside by myself. I've had completely lucid dreams of this creature from outside taking me in the night, waking up screaming and in a cold sweat after being afraid that I wouldn't be able to wake up at all. On the other side, sometimes the dreams are so surreal I'm not even entirely certain I was dreaming even after I wake up. It's always the window. It always comes from that window. The nights I don't have these dreams are the ones that I wake up to see my cat on the windowsill. I like to think she's protecting me. I've never truly seen this thing, but the way it appears in my dream is a tall, lanky figure shrouded in darkness. The face is almost like an owl, pale white, kind of sharper features, not human whatsoever. I imagine it having talons or claws of some kind, because oftentimes I hear a soft tapping on the siding of the house right by my head. I don't know how to get rid of it. I'm stuck in this home for another year, and it's draining me mentally and physically. I cannot bear to go on like this. I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and high risk for depression as of around 2 years ago, strangely enough, around the time that this behavior started. Growing up, my mother moved me around a lot, but we spent most days of my life in Alaska. Alaska is covered in trees and forests, so playing in the forest was nothing new to me, my sisters, or my dogs. When I was around 9, my mother remarried and moved us again. There was a small patch of woods both in front of the house and in the back. Both sides had neighbors. My bedroom window overlooked the front woods, while our downstairs living room overlooked the back. At night, I was always afraid to be seen in front of those windows because I never knew who could see in. I would even duck under the windows to avoid being seen. I never stepped foot in the front woods because for whatever reason, they scared me. But the back woods, I would only go a few feet in and then they would scare me too. I would always find bouncy balls out there, big ones the size of a fist. Our house was the first house on that property with a mechanic shop 5 to 6 acres away in the back. Neither set of neighbors had kids. These bouncy balls came out of nowhere. Periodically, over the course of 5 years, I would randomly find them out there. Every time I thought I'd collected them all, time would pass and I would find another one. Our dogs wouldn't even go in those woods. Things do get more spooky as I get older and realize things, as well as heard stories from my siblings. During those 5 years, there were days that I would wake up in the middle of the night and be petrified. I would turn on all the lights upstairs and sit in a spot where not a single window or door could see me until someone else woke up. My sister would wake up in the middle of the night and see large black figures in her room. She went to another sister's room to wake them up but couldn't wake them up. She came to my room to wake me up and I wouldn't wake up either. She said the whole time this figure followed her around until finally she went downstairs to our parents' room and slept with them for the night. My two other sisters refused to go in those woods, front and back. They told me that looking at those woods would give them immediate chills. That's the end of the story, but y'all, if you make these cookies, put on a freaking timer. Do you see this nonsense? I'm gonna start this off by saying that I'm aware it's possible that I could have been half asleep and imagining this, but it didn't really feel like that. A few years ago, when I was 13, I woke up in the middle of the night to see my door was open around 8 inches. At this time, I had lights on my ceiling that were similar to LED light strips, but they weren't very bright. Well, anyways, I woke up and I thought I saw a person standing out in the hallway, but I couldn't tell who it was. I just assumed it was my mom checking in on me before she went to bed, so I called out to her a couple of times. It was when she didn't respond or move that I started to get a little scared. My eyes were starting to adjust a little, but I couldn't really tell who it was, just that there was definitely someone there. I was pretty scared at this point, so I sat up in my bed and turned on my lamp. It was at its lowest setting, so my room only lit up a little, but I could very clearly see my mom standing right outside my door. She didn't move, she didn't say anything. She was just staring and smiling. I just looked at her for a few seconds and called out to her again, but she still just stood there smiling. I think I should also mention that it wasn't a nice smile. I think the best way I can describe this is that it was just very evil looking. I was really freaking out, so without looking away, I grabbed this lamp, turned it up, and pointed it at her, and the second I did, she was gone. I yelled for my mom, and she came into my room and was freaked out when I told her, but she just said that I probably imagined it. I was wide awake the entire time this was happening, and I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure my door was shut when I went to bed that night, but like I said, it was open when I woke up. The only other weird experiences I've had in that house was when I was around 8 and I woke up in the middle of the night and watched my closet door slowly open. It is possible I was just imagining that though, and I was pretty young, so I might be remembering it wrong. I don't think it could have been sleep paralysis because I was fully moving around. And in sleep paralysis, you are completely paralyzed. I've had a lot of experiences with the paranormal ever since I was a child. I live in the UK and I'm not sure if some of the not human creatures live here, but I have something in the area near where I live that seems to resemble this. I live in the suburbs, close to the countryside, and there's woods that run for miles and miles, a 20-second walk away from my house. Well, I've always been scared of the woods because I knew something wasn't right in there. I used to see a figure in the trees and have always had this feeling of being watched when I go in them. So because of that, since I was a child, I've tried to avoid them. I never knew what it was, and I never believed in skinny boys. I refused to type that name, until my friend told me about them. It was around 4 a.m, and I was having fun with friends when she told me about them as a joke, and I started saying their names over and over again until I heard a blood-curdling scream come from my back garden. The scream continues, and then it sounds like there were more than one of them. I'm home alone, my friend was on the phone, and everything went dead silent apart from the screams, which lasted until the sun came up, but none of my neighbors could hear them. Since that night, I have never said their names or went looking for it again. I told my partner about the rule of never whistling or singing when you're walking down the street near the house, but he never believed in them. This is where the story happens. My partner likes to joke around and scare me by saying their names, and since my partner has never been in the woods, he wanted to walk them. So we take the dogs and set off. I was nervous and tried not to look in the trees the best I could. We walked in the back entrance of one of the trails where a steep drop is off some rocks. We decided to sit there and enjoy the sunset. For a while, but I got a feeling that we were being watched. I got us out of there. Beside the rocks is another path towards a road that takes you to another area before the woods continue. We get out and start walking to the path that will take us back to the area of the woods that I live in, and I was fussing over the dog when my partner stopped and said that he saw something in the bushes watching. He described it as a boxer dog mixed with a deer. It was missing its antlers and had black eyes. When I turned around, it was gone. "Don't look at anything and stick to the path," I said, and I got us out of those woods. But not before my partner whistled. The branches start snapping behind us, and I fast walked us to the clearing just out of the woods. A branch snaps next to us, and our dog lunges for something in the trees, barking and growling, and I drag my dog back scared for him, and we bolt. We look back and see a fox-looking creature staring at us. We currently live in my husband's grandparents' home in Virginia, about an hour out of Lynchburg. One key thing to know about me is that I've experienced paranormal activity my entire life. We took over this house once my husband got out of the military, and his grandmother had passed away in 2013, and it sat vacant since his grandfather lived with my husband's parents due to his health. About the first month here, we were all asleep, and I was woken up to the sound of an entire platoon drummer and all going past my window. It's important to note that we do not live near the road, and we're also a good distance either direction from our neighbors. literally in such a rural part of town that we drive an hour to go shopping. This scared the absolute mess out of me, but would not be the last paranormal experience that we had. When we moved in, everything was left exactly as it was. We moved here in 2019 and she passed in 2013. A typical hoarder's home, not bad, but still bad. At one time, we had 3 kids, ages 3 to 6 months, so it was interesting keeping them all out of everything. Every now and then, I'd hear what sounded like a lady scolding my children. I would go check, and indeed, there were things where they shouldn't have been. A few months after, we found a recorder, my husband played it, and you can hear his grandmother on it testing it. My blood ran cold when it was the same voice that I would hear all the time scolding my children in that house. When my oldest was 4, she pointed to a picture of my husband's grandmother and said, word for word, "I remember when I was grandma." Still gets me because she is a spitting image of that woman. There has been so much more, from her reassuring me that things would be fine when I had my 4th, to something warning me to head inside when it was dark out and I felt something threatening outside. I've been woken up to the house shaking and a woman screaming. I believe it was her because every time this has happened, my husband's life has been in danger. And on top of that, anytime the topic of moving gets brought up, things begin to move around the house. And by moving, I mean things get thrown around the house. I'm pretty sure she doesn't like the thought of us moving out of her home. These are not all of the stories of my paranormal encounters, and I have plenty more stories, especially from living with my parents, that I would love to share if you're interested. If you don't mind, I'd like to share with you something that happened to me in Portugal. I'd like to really get your opinion on this. This occurred at around 8 to 9 years ago, and it's about a dream that I had with a coworker. She and her baby boy used to be haunted by some shadowy figure that liked to talk to her son and make him say cruel things to her. She only saw the shadow and its eyes and could only hear unclear whispering. She always talked to me about it and always was saying that her son never slept well, was always screaming about this shadow. Well, one day I told her that I would like to meet the boy, and when I met him, I saw it. The shadow was there, with him, all the time, and was telling the boy to hide from me. I could hear it so clearly. I looked at her and asked if I could embrace him. I didn't think at the time, I just asked her. She entrusted me with her son. I embraced the boy and instantly felt him relax. He was at ease. He spent the entire morning trying to hold my hand and smiling. She said that was the first and only night that the shadow went away and her son slept the entire night. A couple of months later, I have this dream that I mentioned at the beginning. In the dream, my friend is in the hallway of her apartment and that shadow is hovering over her. I appeared in front of her and tried to make her stop screaming and to look at me because she was panicked. I stared at the shadow until it disappeared. The next morning, when talking to the friend, I told her about my dream, and apparently she had had the exact same dream, but from her perspective, and she couldn't get me to hear or see her. When I turned to leave in her dream, she saw me with black and white wings with feathers. For some time after that, the shadow actually didn't bother her or her son. The connection that I have with this friend is so strange because we're really not that close, but even if I'm not close to her, I can tell when she needs me. I know when she needs me. The women in my family have the ability to see and hear things, and I would just really like your opinion on this. Do you know what's happening to me? One night, I was having a sleepover with my friend, and we did it in my grandma's yard in a tent, so it would be like we were camping. My grandma lived very close to the woods, and that is very important to this story. Everything was relatively normal until we got tired at around 1 in the morning. I laid on my mattress, and I started hearing scratching beside of me. It was definitely coming from outside of the tent, but I thought it was just my sister. But it kept going, and kept going, and kept going. There's a little piece of the tent where you can see outside, and right where I could see outside was where the scratching was occurring, but it was a little bit blurry, so it was hard to make out what was there. I'm really, really afraid of this stuff, but my friend isn't. So she told me that it was nothing, but it didn't stop, and it didn't make me feel better. Then, from that little window that made things a little bit blurry, I saw the hand that was scratching. It was white in color, but also a little bit clear. It had a long finger, and it was still scratching when I saw it. At this point, my friend and I were trying to sleep when we saw this creature's back. It was white, and it was rubbing the tent wall. And that's not even the worst. The tent's pretty big. It has 2 rooms and 1 hallway. This thing went away, but we heard footsteps coming from inside the hall, and then it jumped against our tent trying to get in. My friend kept saying it has to be a deer, but I knew it wasn't. I knew it was a creature. Eventually, I see a white face, no eyes, no nothing, but I knew it was staring at me, moving its head around, trying to see if I was scared. I called my sister on the phone. She wasn't in the tent, and she came out with us. It was still scratching. I'm still terrified. My sister and my friend start singing to get distracted, but it was still freaking scratching. Eventually, I somehow fell asleep with the scratching still occurring, and when I woke up at 8 in the morning, there was no sign, and this is one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me, even to this day. I'm from a small town in Iowa where it seems like everyone knows everyone. We moved around quite a bit, but always still lived in that town. When I was 8, we moved into a house that was 3 bedrooms. It was me, my mom, my stepdad, and my 4 brothers. 2 of them only stayed with us on the weekends. This house seemed pretty normal to anyone who came to visit, but I had a bad feeling as soon as I stepped foot in this place. My bedroom was the only one on the first floor. Everyone else was upstairs. Our bathroom had a secret door that led to the kitchen and the basement. This house had so many secret things about it. I remember my mom making me go to sleep downstairs in my room, and I would wake up every single night. I don't know what woke me up, but it was always woken up. The dresser drawers each time would be wide open, and both of my closet doors were open. It always felt like someone was watching. I would go to the basement to do laundry and have an awful feeling. I would feel some sort of heavy presence down there always, like something was sitting on my chest. It was terrible. There was a spiral staircase to get to the basement, and you never knew if you were alone there because of the secret entrance. My brother would always use it to sneak out. One night, my mother was out, and my brothers were all gone, with the exception of my baby brother. My great-aunt had come over to watch us, and at around 9:30 at night, he was asleep, and so was she. So I go down to do some laundry, and as I came to the basement, I felt a weird feeling. It was like impending doom that I'd never felt before, and it was awful. And then I started to hear what sounded like my aunt coming down the stairs to the basement, so I started asking when she woke up. It wasn't until about a minute later that I realized I never got an answer. I turned around and was met with the scariest thing I've ever seen, a deep black shadowish figure. I could make out eyes, but that was it, and my blood ran cold. I thought for sure I was going to die because the only way out of the basement was right past this thing, so finally I gathered my courage. Before I could even run past, though, it disappeared right in front of me. I've never ran so fast, and I never returned back down to that basement. I have several stories that I need to dump somewhere before I go insane. Story 1. It was around 2022, and I was on my grandma's computer like usual since I lived with her at the time. She was out getting groceries and my uncle was asleep. Though I was the only person awake, there was some sense of dread. It was the kind of dread that you can't really put your finger on. Then, there it is, my grandma calling my name while I know very well that she's not there. When I didn't answer, the voice kept calling for me and banging on my door. I have no clue or why my uncle didn't wake up around that time, but ever since that, I've been dealing with weird situations. Even during that, I could hear like whispering outside of the window. It was really strange. Story number 2. This happened a few days ago. I was in my room on my phone while Mom and her husband were out at a concert. I was laying in bed since I've been sick for the past few days and I just wanted to sleep. Everything felt normal until I heard a knock on my door. This was fairly normal since the apartment is haunted and I've dealt with scarier. What really got me was that I heard whispering outside of my door and a strange sense of being watched. While I was looking at the door from my bed, what looked like to be a sickly, skinny finger was there gesturing for me to open this door. Though this wasn't my first time dealing with the finger, it was the first time for the whispering, and I felt sick when I heard it, knowing that I couldn't do anything. I waited for about an hour until it left, and I still felt off during the day. I was wearing my evil eye because that's what I do, but I could still feel like I was being watched. Only me and my mom get affected in these situations, and I've noticed my mom's unfazed by it. But I seem to be the only one getting harassed quite this much. I'm writing in this email to tell you 2 of my most interesting stories, and for backstory, I do and have always lived in Houston, Texas, so I'm not in the mountains, but stuff still definitely happens. Story 1. This story was told to me by my mom and takes place when I was around 20 months old. At the time, me and my mom lived in a small 1-bedroom house, and I was a very active baby. She told me she had a couple of experiences in that house and that she couldn't quite explain, and this experience was the last one that made her decide to just get out of that house and move. It starts at around 3 in the morning, and suddenly she wakes up and has this urge to check on me. She thought nothing of it because it was normal for her to check my crib at night because I used to escape a lot. She gets up and checks my crib, and I wasn't in there. She checks the living room because she kept the door open and I probably crawled out into the open living room, but right as she walks out, she sees me giggling and playing with a ball. It's just me playing regularly until she gets closer, and that's when I roll the ball away and it comes back. It doesn't hit something, but it rolls, stops, and for like 3 to 4 seconds rolls right back. My mom freaks out, grabs me, and just takes me straight to the car, and we drive around until she calms down. Needless to say, we moved out a few months later. Story number 2 takes place when I was around 11 at my grandparents' house in the middle of the woods, right as it was about to get dark specifically. My mom grew up there, and everyone in the family believes that there's something or some things in those woods. So basically, me and my friend Jordan, fake name, were walking through the woods trying to go to our regular hangout spot. These woods had a dirt road where my grandma lived and down further a creek, so to get to our spot we had to walk beside this creek and then cross a small stream. So we get to the stream where we make a little bridge to get across, and I start walking over the bridge and Jordan was right behind me, so I cross the bridge and I see something rustling in these bushes. It's pretty dark and I can't see it well, but I know it's pretty big, and I just think it's a stray dog, so I keep walking, but right as I step off that bridge, it comes out from behind the bushes, and it is not a dog. It has crusty gray skin and dark black eyes. It was on all fours and was around the size of a large dog with pointed limbs, so I'm freaked out and so is Jordan. He's whispering in my ear that we gotta go and says we should run. This thing then stands up and it's 8 feet tall, so obviously and stupidly me and Jordan take off running through the woods towards my grandparents' house. You can literally hear this thing running behind us, chasing us. We make it to the clearing next to my grandparents' house, and we turn to look into the trees, but we can't see it. About halfway on the walk back to the house from there, Jordan screams and runs, so I turn around, and there it is at the tree line, looking right back at me, so I run too. We get home safely and agree to never bring it up again, ever.
For this story, this isn't actually my story, but it's my cousin's. I do have plenty more if you'd like to hear from both him and I. For my cousin's sake for this story, let's call him Nick. We lived in a wooded and secluded part of Ohio, and my aunt and uncle owned about 98 acres of just pure woods. To understand the layout of this land, there's a really long driveway that is over a mile long that leads to the house, and when you do get to the house, it's a really nice double-wide trailer with a fresh-built porch and a big barn. This big barn that we call the shop is around 50 feet away from the house where we put and work all of our tractors and such. The night that all of this happened, Nick was drinking pretty heavily, which we think made him more susceptible to this attack. It was almost midnight, and Nick was in the shop drinking with one of his buddies. Nick said that he had to go pee, and he left the shop to head inside, but instead of going inside, he went around the shop. Like, it was as if his body was taking him there, and he was just along for the ride. He made it behind the barn, and everything went silent. I'm talking dead silence. It was late summer, early fall, and as you know that, silence is not normal. When he noticed this, he tried to turn and run, but he couldn't. It's like his body was frozen and he couldn't move. Once his eyes got fully adjusted to the night is when he saw it. He said it looked to be around 7 to 8 feet tall, black mass of an upper body, but you could also tell it was a human torso. The legs were like a beefed up goat, like the goat had been hitting the leg day for a millennia. The face was the worst part. It was like a horse skull with deer antlers, hollow eyes and almost a glowing sensation, but they were pitch black. He tried to scream and run, but he couldn't. And one minute he was in his body, and the next he just wasn't. Like this thing took control. He started running, and he said it was like watching out of his eyes, but also being able to see his body running in third person. Thankfully, he snapped back into his body and was met with a pack of coyotes. He ran straight into the shop and collapsed, absolutely sobbing. That's the end of the story, but everything in this recipe that could have went wrong did.